What's going on, guys? Savage Your Reptiles here. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and share. You guys have been doing a really good job with the likes and the comments, so the algorithm has been really high. This video is going to be based off of a Facebook comment that I received on one of my posts. If you aren't in the Blood Python group, I highly recommend that you join us. There are a ton of knowledgeable people in that group that can assist with the care and any tips that or questions that you have about blood pythons. This lady in particular said that she's got a new female, and she's been pretty spicy with her and her husband, I assume. If you see this, correct me if I'm wrong, but she said that it's getting to a point that they are struggling with it, or with the female. Some tips that I would give with a spicy blood is kind of just take your time with them. These aren't ball pythons where they say the more you hold them, the more they'll calm down. These guys love to be left alone for the most part, but they will accept handling. So Brock here, he was pretty spicy when he came. I love telling his story because he was in a pretty jacked up situation and he was very defensive. But as you can see, we've got one of the sweetest bloods here. So again, just take your time with him. His story is, when I picked him up, he was in a very, very small tub, and no shame to the guy that I picked him up from, because he actually saved this guy. It was somebody else that dropped him off to him, and he hadn't even had Brock for 24 hours. And he was like, "Hey, I got a blood. I know you know a bit about snakes. Let's see what you can do." So went to go pick him up, and a very small tub. Substrate was like mud almost, which for these guys, no. And then he had a very large water dish like sitting directly on top of him, and he couldn't even turn around in there. So that's I thought it was just like a transfer bin, which I wouldn't even done that, but it wasn't. He actually had him living in there. That's a no-go. But I got him home. Brock was my very first blood. And it's immediately, like when I took the lid off and I lifted the water bowl up, he got really huffy, and he popped his head up above the mud, and he was very defensive. Like, he constantly tried to strike me. But after keeping snakes for a little while, I didn't freak out. Had that been my first encounter with the snake, I probably would have been like, you know what, this isn't for me. But again, that's just why you got to do your research and understand that these guys are more afraid of us than we are of them. So his situation was, he was very scared, and he had been in that crate for some time, transitioning, moving, all of that good stuff. So it was a very stressful moment for him. And, I cleaned him up a bit. I eventually got him out. Now, people recommend snake hooks. I don't own any snake hooks just because, oh, Jesus, dude, you are active. He's active today. I don't own any snake hooks just because I'm not afraid of getting bit. So if you do have larger snakes or smaller snakes, it doesn't have to be large. If you have any snake in general and you are afraid of getting bit, snake hooks are not a bad thing. I personally am not afraid of getting bit, so I don't keep any snake hooks. But long story short, I managed to get him out of the tub with my hands. I just pulled him out. I kind of looked at him a little bit and thought about it, but I was like, you know what, I'm gonna suck it up. If I get bit, I get bit. But I had never been bit by a blood, and I had heard that myth that was like, oh, if you get bit by a blood, they have enough bite force to break your bones. That's bullcrap. But at the time, I didn't know that. So I was like, you know what, I need to be as careful as possible. But I just sucked it up. Like, you know what, let's go. I'm gonna pull him out. If I get bit, it happens. So I pulled him out, and I had a fresh tub of warm water so I could soak him, get all that crusty dirt and mud off of him. And immediately, like, he was fine in my hands, but he was like still very alert, but he wasn't trying to strike me anymore. But immediately, once he touched the water, I don't think I've ever seen a snake as upset as he was. And he's not a small guy, but he's nowhere near where he's gonna be as an adult. I don't think I've ever seen a snake as upset as he was that day. He flailed so hard that the entire tub of water almost flipped over. And it was a pretty big tub, just because I wanted like all of that stuff to come off of him. It was a pretty big tub, but he almost knocked it all over. And I was like, holy crap, like what am I gonna do now? But I just kind of let him sit in there. It was maybe about 2-3 minutes before he chilled out. He soaked for maybe 25-30 minutes, and then I pulled him out and gave him like a quick few dips, just so the stuff that was floating at the top, as I pulled him out, it kind of still sat on him a little bit. So I dipped him in the water a couple times, and he was fine, but he was still very alert. He's definitely not, or he definitely wasn't as chill as he is now. He's a very chill guy now. But as I pulled him out of the water and dipped him, I went to go put him in his enclosure. So he went from a very small tub to a 4x2x2 enclosure. He adjusted to it really well, surprisingly. I didn't know how he was going to react. I didn't really expect anything negative, but I just didn't know, just because this was my first blood. So I was like, okay, let's see what's gonna happen. Let's see how this goes. But he was fine. And then I let him sit for, I want to say it was like 48 hours before I tried to do anything with him. And I noticed there was a lump in the substrate. He's got a mixture of reptichip and sphagnum moss. So there was a humongous lump, so I can tell that's where he was at. He was underneath it. So 2 days later, I moved the substrate out the way and I go to grab him, but I'm taking my time. I'm very cautious at what I do when it comes to new snakes. Now that I know him, he's fine. I go in and just grab him. He doesn't even huff up anymore. He doesn't hiss, breathe hard, anything like that. Nothing. But before, I was very cautious with him, taking my time. And on the slightest touch, I could just touch his back and he'd huff up. He didn't hiss or anything, but he was just like, it was a bluff to kind of throw me off. So once he did that, 2 days later, I was like, I'm gonna leave you alone for a couple more days. At this point, it was probably about 3 days later, and I was like, okay, let's try this again. I went in to touch him again, touched his back, and he huffed up. I'm like, dude, you're probably gonna be like this the entire time. Maybe I should just go ahead and just grab you out. So that's what I did. I went on ahead, I grabbed him out, and I kind of just let him chill in my arms for maybe 10-15 minutes, and he was chill. So the next day I went to grab him, and like all of that huffing was gone. Like no hissing, no huffing. He wasn't puffing up. There was nothing. So I was like, okay, you mellowed out pretty quickly. So I didn't go for touching his head or anything like that, but I would still hold him. Maybe about 2 weeks later is when I had him in my arms, and he was very active. He was moving all over the place, and he ran his head in between my fingers. So I was like, okay, you did that. Let me see if I can go ahead and touch your head. So in the back of my mind, I had the thought or expectation, let's say, to get bit because I was going to touch his head. So like any new keeper that comes to me about bloods, I'm like, you may never get bit by these snakes, but always keep in the back of your mind that you will. So always be thinking like, I will get bit, but you may never get bit. So just always keep that back there. So that's what I did with him. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get bit just because I'm gonna touch his head. So the first thing I did was, I'm not sure if you can see him down here. First thing I did was I let him see my hand up front. I'm not sure if he can see me from back here, but I don't want to just go touching up in his personal space without him knowing. So I would go around front, let him see my hand, and then I would just touch his head, and he'd be fine. All right, let's see. See, I did that. Then he'd be fine. But definitely couldn't do that day one. So, like, a few of the tips that I would definitely say for spicy bloods is let them chill for the most part by themselves, and then very minimal handling sessions. So maybe 3 a week, and very short, like 5 minutes. 5-minute handling sessions, put them back, 3 a week. And then see how that goes, especially if you're working with something young. Now, if you're working with something bigger, I'm not sure, just because even though he's a nice size, he's still a baby. He's still young. and I don't really have any, negative experiences with a large blood, so I can't really give advice there. But that's definitely something I do. Excuse me. That's definitely something I do recommend. When you're getting into bloods, get a juvenile. That way, if they are spicy, you can work them into this, something very calm and chill that's very manageable for you. Even when they get their large adult size, it'll still be very manageable versus getting something that's already an adult and they're very spicy just because they weren't worked with as a juvenile. So if you get a juvenile, just always keep that thought in your mind. You're gonna get bit. The bites don't hurt at all. I've been bit by my other two babies. Leviathan, when he first arrived, that one didn't hurt. Hers hurt a little bit, very small, but nothing that was just like, holy crap. It was the shock from the bite that did more damage than the actual bite. But yeah, their bites don't hurt at all. But for the most part, just leave them alone, and then very minimal handling sessions, just because at that age, they are very timid. They are very nervous. They love to be in closed quarters. So when you're bringing them out in the open like that, it's a very uncomfortable setting for them. So, you can bring them out, I say minimal 3 times a week. Maximum 3 times a week. And then minimal handling sessions about 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, somewhere in there. And then just go ahead and put them back. Another method that you could use is, once you've got them out of their setup, if they're still being feisty, just go ahead, sit them in your lap. That's it. Just sit them in your lap. Don't even touch them. Just let them do their thing. Of course, when you go to pick them back up, they may be a bit defensive or something like that. But this is a method that you could use. That even 3 days a week, you could have them just sitting in your lap. Another one is whatever setup you've got, whether that be a tub setup, a rack setup, or a enclosure. If you've got an enclosure, you can open the doors, or maybe not open the doors. Let's not do that one. If you've got a tub or a rack, you could open the tub or open a rack, and you could just sit in front of it. Just be in their presence, getting them used to you, just because they aren't, used to human interaction when they're that young. So you can just sit in front of them, allow them to be in your presence, and they'll allow you to be in theirs. Even though it's still uncomfortable for them, it's a lot more comfortable than being hands-on. So that's another method that you can use with spicy bloods. But all in all, they're very manageable. It's just gonna take time. This is nothing that's gonna happen overnight. Like I said, they aren't balls where you can just, if you get a new one, you can throw them in a 4x2x2 enclosure, as long as it's got a crap ton of clutter in there, and then the more you hold them, the more docile they'll be. It's not the case. Less is more with these guys, as I have been told by a few professionals. So I definitely would take that piece of advice. Less is more with these guys. So 3 maximum sessions, and then very short, like 5 to 7 minutes. And then if you don't want to do that, just be in their space to where they can see you, they can smell you, without being hands-on. But other than that, guys, take care of your reptiles.